Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Breaking Brews podcast, a podcast focused on the business side of beer and what's driving today's thriving craft beer industry. Whether you're one of the thousands of people making craft beer what it is today, or just love great beer and want to know more about it, this show is here to cover everything from sales, marketing, and more. The Breaking Brews podcast delivers real-life scenarios and experiences from industry professionals that will help your beer knowledge evolve. To tap into more great beer content, visit breakingbrews.com today. And now, the moment you've been waiting for. Let's get this session started. All right, podcast. I am your host, Jason Sircone, and we are set once again for a brand new session of the show. Before we get started, if you haven't done so already, jump back in the archives, check out sessions 1 through 18. They are live and waiting for you there. If you like what you hear, jump over to iTunes, drop a rating, drop a review. Let me know how I'm doing with the podcast, and help the show find the ears of more thirsty beer enthusiasts and beer professionals just like you. You can subscribe to the Breaking Brews podcast on Stitcher, on iTunes, on Spotify, and on Google Play Music. And as always, if you like an episode, share it on Instagram, share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter. It's cool to see the show circulating across the World Wide Web, so if you like what you hear, do me a solid and let your friends know about the podcast. Greatly appreciated. All right, we are set to dive into session 19, and I hope you guys are ready to have some fun today. I sat down with two of my favorite people in the beer industry here in the Pittsburgh region, Meg Evans and Lauren Baker. You may remember Lauren from session 3 of the Breaking Brews podcast. Lauren and I talked about production management, which was her role at North Country Brewing Company. Since then, Lauren has now transitioned to the Harmony Inn, which is also owned by the owners of North Country Brewing, so she's still connected with the brewery, but she's now the general manager at the Harmony Inn. So they feature the North Country beers on tap, as well as many other local brands from across the region, and they have some great food too. It's a wonderful spot in Harmony. If you're in the area, you should check it out. When Lauren transitioned into that role, Meg, who was the head brewer at Rock Bottom, she took over as production manager at North Country Brewing. So great things happening with that company. It was great to have both of their expertise live in the studio. We talked very extensively about event planning. We covered everything from building a very small beer event up to a major festival, which both of them have done and done very well. So if you're in the mindset of wanting to start an event, start a festival, there are many important aspects that you need to consider, and they were covered here on today's show. So you're going to learn a lot. Also in the show notes, I'm going to include a link to a post that I wrote on Breaking Brews about some things to consider when you are planning out a beer festival. So there's a ton of great information jam-packed into today's show. I'm going to give you guys a chance right now to unpack it and enjoy it all. This is session 19 of the Breaking Brews podcast with Meg Evans and Lauren Baker. All right, well, guys, welcome back to the Breaking Brews podcast. We are live in the studio today with Meg Evans and Lauren Baker from North Country Brewing and Harmony Inn. What's up, ladies?
Hey, Jason.
So for all of our loyal listeners, you may remember Lauren's voice back from session 3 of the Breaking Brews podcast. If you haven't listened to that episode, jump back and do so after you listen to this one. We got some good shit to talk about today, too. Since Lauren has already shared the story of her comeuppance in the craft beer industry, I'd like to give Meg the floor to introduce herself to you guys and give us some background on yourself, Meg, and talk to us about everything leading right up to your new role at North Country Brewing, which you just recently started as of when we sat down to record today.
Do you have 5 hours? Because that's a long story.
Bring it. I'd buy this airtime.
Give you a bridge version. My career, I've always been very purposeful. Like the first time I kind of had an inkling that the craft beer industry was like the thing I wanted was someone brought me to a homebrew meeting, and the social aspect of it. Everyone was very open and willing to talk about, and talk about beer, but like answer all of what I felt were really dumb questions. Looking back, they probably weren't that dumb, but I still it give me a sense of like community. From that point, I had just kept on trying to get hired at Southern Tier Brewing Company, which is close to where I was living at the time. And I mean, that then fast forward a few years, I finally got offered a job gluing boxes and labeling bottles. And, you know, one of my friends, she like called me. She's like, I had this job 40 hours a week. And I'm like, sold. And I put in my notice on my job I was working then and moved back into my parents' house to go work this job. And then from there, any opportunity I saw, I jumped at everything. I was like, I want to keep moving up in this industry. I want to eventually be a brewer. So when a job on the bottling line opened up, I raised my hand to help, and that ended up becoming permanent. And then within a few months of starting at Southern Tier, though, I also was like, well, I want to move this faster. So I applied to Oregon State University pretty much a year to when I started at Southern Tier. I moved out to Oregon. I was home on winter break 3 months later, and then they offered me a job in their cellar. And I was like, well, I don't know if I really want to spend another $60K on this career that I'm still only going to get paid like $14 to do. So I moved back and started that job. So everything has always just been like looking at the opportunities that are in front of me and making decisions and going after them and putting one foot in front of the other, like not going too far, but just actively trying. I stayed at Southern Tier another 10 months and then moved down to Pittsburgh. And that's where got my first job on an actual brew house, making the beer versus just working in the cellar at Rivertown. Stayed with them for about a year and a half, and then got my opportunity at Rock Bottom, where I pretty much saw Rock Bottom as an opportunity. Well, like, do I want to stay in Pittsburgh? It could offer a job or a chance to move. It also is bigger. So if I want to move up into a head brewer position, I saw those opportunities like ahead of me. So that's why I made the jump over there. Within a year and a half of being there, I was offered a head brewer job and stayed there for another few years. And then kind of where I'm at now, you know, I had recently, like, I'm going through a divorce, and I was like, well, I don't know what to do with my life. I'm gonna save up some money, maybe move out west, maybe do whatever. And then Lauren said, hey, I have this job. And I'm like, well, you've kicked ass there. You've created a path for this company to do really cool things. So that's when I decided that North Country was going to be my next move, you know, and it's all been about growth and like challenging myself. And that's part of the reason too, you know, not only going through divorce, but also like, I didn't feel like I was being challenged at rock bottom anymore. And I needed that stimulation. And so 2 weeks into North Country, and it's been really cool. It's a really, really awesome team. Like, they've just welcomed me with open arms. Like, it's like one of those first dynamics that I'm like, wow, I think I really like this, you know, before ever really diving too far into what my job is going to be yet. So
that's great.
Yeah.
It's an awesome path, and clearly you built a lot of experience. And so today I have Meg and Lauren here in the studio with us, and between the three of us, our plan is to rap about something that plays a pretty strong and significant role in the craft beer industry, and that is the cultivation of beer events and festival planning. All of us have some experience at various levels in building different events, so the idea here was to create a little bit of a round table where we can bounce some ideas off of each other and ultimately share with all of you listeners out there some great tips and great strategies to make sure the next event you plan goes off very, very soundly. So before we dive too deep into this, let me open up the mics to Meg and Lauren. What type of events have you guys planned in the past that have come together and gone very well?
I feel like just with my background, being in beer sales for a long time, I had like the biggest focus was on just like your basic brew. You know, years ago, pint nights were an effective way to promote your brand at bars. And then, years later, developing different things, getting involved in some bigger organizations down in Texas, working on beer festivals, discussion panels, trying to get our community involved in different things. Tying in craft beer to community events was something that we definitely tried to do. Music festivals that incorporated beer. So those are some of the things that I've kind of worked on in the past.
Yeah, I think gone are the days I think you still see it to some degree where you go and there's like a beer tent where you can get $1 Coors Light or $1 Miller Lite, but now it seems like even these small community events are focusing more on the craft beer that's in their area and bringing that in for folks to enjoy instead.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of cool too. People like want to see more unique events, but
yeah,
stuff that I've worked on, being as a head brewer at Rock Bottom, I was put up to the challenge a lot to like bring more focus to the restaurant and the brewery and what we're doing. So I mean, a lot of the things I've done circled around like craft beer weeks and stuff like that. But I mean, I always wanted to make something really unique. So I did like a video game mini beer fest, and that was really fun, and made it like a tournament style so people could kind of come in and, I don't know, have fun with the competition of it all. Like I've done kickoff to craft beer weeks events at Rock Bottom. And tapping parties were always pretty regular. So trying to make those unique, whether or not, you know, you incorporate some sort of pairing. So we would do like beer and cheese pairings, beer and chocolate pairings, all of that kind of stuff. But I think like the real reason I'm here to talk to everyone is because for the past 3 years, I've put on a heavy metal craft beer fest called Brutal Beer Fest. And that was really cool, and probably one of the biggest projects I've personally worked on outside of brewing.
Now, to clear the air, Meg, you're not here just because of Brutal. I mean, sell yourself short.
Because you didn't just plan a panel discussion.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that.
That
was like a week ago.
Yeah, I think, well, that's the thing about this subject is it is very diverse and has a lot of different layers to it. It could be anything from a pint night, like Lauren mentioned, right up to a full-blown heavy metal beer festival like you've planned, Meg, and then everything in between. I think that the event side of this is something new on the weekends, or even if it's during the week, whatever it is, they're always looking for something new and something different. And that's why I felt like this conversation could be valuable to our listeners, because the three of us have all been to events that have kicked ass. We've all been to events that have not kicked ass. And the idea is to help people plan kick-ass events, because events that suck, they're not, that just sucks, for lack of a better term. So that's a perfect segue into the next question I have for you guys. What is the most important aspect to consider when planning a kick-ass beer event? And that could actually be a multi-layered question. I'm sure there's a lot of things to consider that you want to share.
Yeah, I know primarily, like, Laura and I almost unanimously were like, audience first and foremost. Most like, you need to know who you're marketing to and who's going to be your consumer, because that's going to lead you in a certain direction, whichever way, you know, where you're going to market, who you're going to advertise to. Like, there's going to be so many different avenues for you.
Yeah, I think like really having that initial idea. We see people all the time that are like, oh, okay, I'm going to do this event. And it's like, why are you doing it? What are your goals? Are you setting off to raise money or raise awareness about something? Are you trying to expand your brand? Are you trying to get your community involved in something? What is your purpose? And that's kind of a good, starting point, but different directions of trying to figure out where you're going with your event.
So what have been some of the successful ways that you've marketed these types of events? And did you use social media, word of mouth, in-house promotion, a combination of everything? What have you done, and what's been most effective in these areas?
I mean, I personally really do love using social media, and no matter how often they're changing algorithms and the things and ways you can use it, I think it's always still an effective media. And just knowing how much to use it, when to use it, so you're not making it something that people won't actually start ignoring. I personally love Instagram because I love the visual aspect of it. For us, in a lot of ways, having an attractive image or having a video, those type of things stand out for us. We were able to use pictures from last year because that alone kind of helped drive that fear of missing out. If you're like, oh, that looks so cool, I want to make sure I go. Or we also did like a countdown where we created a video and it was just funny and people were like looking forward to watching them. Those were a couple really impactful tactics. I tried early on using email marketing, and I think for Brutal Beer Fest, it wasn't effective. So we actually, after the first year we did that, we suspended that and just, so it's good and bad. It's always good to reflect what worked and what didn't work. So I think,
for sure.
I always think, again, it goes back to who's your audience? What are they actually using too?
I think social media is like a lot more effective for an established event as well. You have that organic content that you can use from previous years. A first-time event, I've seen, social media, because a lot of people aren't already directed to that. People aren't already following that page. They're not aware of that. And so using outside marketing is kind of important in that aspect. With other companies, I'm just trying to think of, you kind of were promoted by other companies that were your sponsors and your vendors, and getting them on board to help promote you too is really important.
Yeah, I was going to say, jump off as soon as you were saying that. I'm like, yeah, that was another thing we used a lot, is that we created assets for the people we were working with that they could just push from their avenues, and I think it's a great point to say that early on, you might want to lean into those people who support your idea initially and ask them to push things. And I think it's not really a flaw, but I think we all kind of internalize not wanting to ask the people who support what we work on to help us promote. But like, those are going to be the people we need early on, other colleagues to push your stuff. You're surprised how often people are like, yeah, no problem. And it's not that hard. And especially if you create an asset that they can use, it's super easy too.
And the fact that they're involved with the event tells you that they have some belief and that they're going to want to make it good. So they should be proud to stand behind it and say, hey, we're a part of this. You should come check it out. It's going to be a good time, so on and so forth.
Well, even on like the vendor side of things, when as a brewery or, a company, we're asked to be involved in other events, if they have strong marketing, then I'm more convinced to help them push that marketing too. We've had some different events that we've been a part of that the marketing is a little sketchy. And you're like, okay, well, I'd share this to my own Facebook page, but I don't really understand it. So having that clear marketing that people will understand, they'll be more likely to share it.
It's always a funny thing to talk about. And I hear it with a lot of breweries that are open. What kind of budget do you have for opening? And this relates back to like the event side of things as well, is that a lot of people don't realize that put a little money into marketing, whether it's you're hiring a graphic designer to make an attractive image. I'm just so taken back when people are like, oh, my whoa.
Yeah.
Why?
And especially with a new event where you have to come out strong and you have to get the word spread. You can't do that for free. And that's something that when you are building your budget, you have to factor in right from the start.
And I love too, now working with North Country, that we have someone who does all of our marketing in-house. So it's consistent. It's always really attractive. And like, I think it makes it easy too, on the fly. I can be like, hey, Andy, can you do this? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. There's value in investing in someone on your team too, whether you're talking about once a year, or, you know what I'm saying? Or if you're looking at your brewery too.
Yeah, people don't realize that graphics are not free. Unless you have a friend that's willing to do something like that.
They only do that a couple times.
Yeah, graphics are not free, and you can't just open up Microsoft Paint on your own and throw something together.
You can.
I'm gonna say,
but it's not gonna.
Too, if you do want to save that money to maybe teach yourself, Photoshop isn't cheap,
right,
and it's definitely complicated. And there's other types like it where people do offer lessons on how to use these resources. So, whatever way you want to go, like if you want to learn that skill set, which is something I definitely had started to attempt with Brutal, it's another avenue too, but you still it's still an investment, because there's still a yearly or monthly fee for Photoshop now, and Skillshare still has a monthly fee. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it.
You could use Canva as well. That's a great resource to use in regards to design. I mean, you can't do your full logo design, in my opinion. There's things you can set up to where if you want something very basic, you can pull it off. But in regards to flyer design and things of that nature, if you are working on a budget, that's a resource you could use for some things too. But yeah, you don't want to skimp in that area, because that can hurt you in the long run.
Yeah, I liked Canva for a long time, and then I definitely, I felt like I was creating the same type of content all the time. So it depends, but I do if you do spend a little bit on Canva, you can create, if you need to take a background out of an image, so you need something like that, you can do that. And there's a lot of resources like it though.
I've always been a big proponent of Canva, especially since I used to use PowerPoint for those types of designs. And it just became, it's time for something else.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So Canva came along, and I remember my girlfriend just yelling at me, what are you doing with PowerPoint? What the fuck's wrong with you? So, I don't know.
I don't even know how you use PowerPoint to create that.
They didn't look good.
Okay.
They just were.
They just were there. And then when I discovered Canva, I'm like, God, I've been doing this wrong for so long.
Yeah.
Well, both of you working in a restaurant type of environment where you have servers or bartenders that have access to customers, have you ever tried to have them promote events by just maybe at the end when they're handing the check out to somebody saying, hey, by the way, we're doing this beer tasting next week, maybe you want to check it out? Is that something you've tried, and if so, has it worked?
I feel Meg has more experience with this now. Just stepping into my role at the Harmony Inn, I haven't had a whole lot of opportunity to spend time with our staff yet. We have a couple staff meetings coming up. That's something that I definitely noticed is we have to get our staff excited about things to get our customers excited about things. They need to, when we have a new beer out, I try to get them to all taste it and get it, get them information so that they can be like excited about it with their customers. It's the same way with our events. One thing that I've definitely noticed is making sure that we have very clear guidelines of what our events are entailing. I just am used to doing these types of events, so I understand in my head a tap takeover to me is just like, all right, I know what that is. Like, I can talk about that. But our staff did not really understand that. They're like, what is the deal with this? So there are some things that, because these haven't really been done at our location to do something with the customers to get them involved, our staff does need a little bit of training on what that means to do an event and why are we doing it? What is the purpose of it? And I think like getting them excited about it is really important.
I definitely can relate to like getting them the right information because they don't totally always get it. And if you look at like a lot of servers too, I think in the restaurant world, a lot of them, they're servers because they want to make money and they want to make it fast. And I understand that dynamic. I'm not talking shit on it at all. Some things like when we partnered with Pittsburgh Musical Theater with Rock Bottom, they would bring us inserts that we can put in our checkbooks. So for that type of stuff, that was really easy. They were always adamant to put those in the checkbooks when we asked them to do that. When it came to talking about events, again, it goes back to getting people excited. If they don't care and you're not making them do it, they're not going to do it. But if it's on your menu, like we always put events on the backside of our menus at Rock Bottom. So every week I created this sheet that let our servers know what beers are coming out, when they're coming out for that week, which ones are almost out. But then I always left a line for if there's for events. And if there's something that I was like, they're going to ask a couple questions. And they had to look at this every shift they came in. So that I would use that space to explain and jump off of if like there's any information I might think might be a little confusing to them, because if the consumer sees it on the menu, they might ask the question. So they're always prepared with that. And that was kind of my way to counter any confusion or questions, because if I'm trying to think of it, like the best way to say this, like even my managers, like they may or may not be as involved in an event, so they may or may not be the server as well, but like they then have that information too about what's going on there too. So it was a great resource. So finding ways to make sure you have the communication out there is really clutch, whether or not you have a board that your servers check every day or every week, whatever is most conducive. But relaying that information is key. But I mean, I don't think I've ever pinpoint how to get servers the most excited consistently.
Money.
One
thing that I'm really going to start dabbling in is creating incentives for our staff, because, and we've had this discussion before. I can't make everybody give a shit about craft beer and our company the way that I do. What I can give them though is an opportunity to make some extra money, win a gift card, win a hoodie. And we've tried these things in the past and it's very hit or miss. But we didn't have managers that were very behind it either. And so with events, I think last year we did run an incentive of who at both locations could sell the most Brewfest tickets to customers, and those employees that won, they got tickets to go to Brewfest. And that was something that our staff, people are very competitive in, which like getting a day off and being able to go to Brewfest. So it was fun to do last year. And the people that got to go, we did that with a beer dinner as well. Whoever sold the most tickets to a beer dinner got to go to the beer dinner.
I like that a lot too.
Yeah, it's great.
I was going to add too with that money incentive at Rock Bottom, our management team worked on they created like games for them a lot, like especially using like really pop culture type thing. Like they had used Harry Potter and like broke the like whole restaurant into teams, and it helped keep each other accountable, like whether or not they're tracking what Rock Rewards they're getting or making sure they're cleaning up, like whatever it is, they got points based on all of that. And the one they were doing right as I was leaving was a Game of Thrones theme, so they had like all these like different houses, and I don't totally know all these references, but I'm gonna try.
I'll talk to you about that later.
I've never seen a single episode, so I got nothing.
But it's another way to get talking about like
Lawrence face right now,
like nobody in this room is Game of Thrones. Like, oh my gosh, I have nobody to talk to about this.
Yeah, I think again that relates to definitely incentivize and money too, because when I would do beer trainings with servers, I always try to hit hard. Like the more knowledge you have on craft beer, And whatever, like your consumer is going to see that and they're going to pay you more, like no matter what it's going to turn, because you're either going to get a better tip or you're going to or sell them more beer, which then again hits your tips.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I definitely think money is.
That was something that I tried to use on the end, like not even the restaurant that I'm managing, but as a beer rep, when I would schedule events at a bar, and say we do a tap takeover, I was able to develop those kind of programs with the managers for their staff. Like, hey, I'm going to come in and I'm going to do this an event. And if we can do an incentive for your servers and your bartenders, whoever sells the most of this specific beer or all of our beers, then, we'll give them a trip to this or give them tickets to that. And it definitely helps to get them engaged in that way. Give them some incentive to be a part of it.
If you go back in session 17, you guys, I spoke with Andrew Copeland, who created Secret Hopper with his wife, and we talked about this and the fact that getting your staff involved can be huge because they have the most direct contact with your customer base, and getting them excited. Lauren hit the nail on the head bringing up the incentives. I think that's a big part of it, and it will help build that excitement towards they're not just working towards their check, they're not just working towards their tips. All that falls into place, and it actually improves just by them taking these extra steps to say, like Andrew's big point that their research uncovered was that if you have a server that says, would you like to take a 4-pack home with you? Or would you like to take a growler home? You're just by offering that, increasing the check, which can increase your tips, and it gets your beer out into the public more. So I could see that easily spilling over to, hey, did you know we're doing this beer event? We're selling tickets for it tonight if you want to grab them, or you can go on this website. Whatever you do to generate some more publicity, I think that's a huge asset to have.
At the end of the day, I mean, it is your staff. You could, in whatever capacity, you can build the standards however you want. And I mean, if you want to make it part of your culture that your team is part of your team and they're part of your company, like, I think that instantly takes you away from just the general server mentality. You build that culture around them being part of your company. And I think that sometimes can fall short because it's still like, it's always busy in a restaurant setting. It's always busy when you're like serving beer, but like you can still cultivate that culture where they're excited about every single thing that you're doing. And whether that is incentives, whether it is like, I don't know, from an employee standpoint, offering them certain things that make them more than just a server for you.
Right.
Or again, kind of making it part of the job requirement. This is what we ask of you. If we have events, we need you to push them,
Yeah.
And it depends on how you go about it. But
and keeping consistency involved as well.
Yeah,
doing that with
absolutely.
every event or every beer release, just making sure they always have that message to relay to their tables.
Exactly.
That's huge.
I think one thing that we definitely and I don't want this to turn into a North Country meeting of us discussing our brand developments.
Sponsored by North Country.
Yeah, but one thing
This could easily be a nice segue into that conversation.
I think one thing that we did develop that we really haven't taken advantage of that has been leaves my mind sometimes is we started a North Country Harmony Inn staff only Facebook group, and that even we have our like beer tenders that help us that like work for us at beer festivals and samplings and stuff like that, and they're all in this group with us together, and we will post when we have a new beer release or when we have different events going on, because I know they're always on their phone and they're always checking Facebook. So that is one thing that we have tried to utilize, but it's something that we need to be more consistent on, that I feel like we haven't been consistent enough, so it hasn't been as effective. But I know that they're able to get some of their information on there. So if somebody has a question about an event, we can share that event on there. They can get it right off of their phone, right off of their Facebook page. And it's kind of like they get a notification when we post something. So
that's great. So there you go, guys. Big takeaway. Talk to your staff, get them excited, and get them involved in promoting. All right, guys, you heard about how they've built a complete taproom experience in Session 8 of the Breaking Brews podcast. Now it's time to check them out in person. Levity Brewing is the first brewery to hit Indiana, Pennsylvania since the 1930s, and they've got everything you could ask for in a craft beer destination. Levity features a diverse beer menu with offerings ranging from hop-forward and juicy IPAs to wild ales, stouts, and pilsners, alongside a full food menu featuring apps, salads, paninis, and much, much more. Looking for something fun to do with your evening? From ukulele jams to live music to Levity's annual summer party, there is never a dull moment inside these four walls. Located only an hour away from the great city, is worth going the extra mile to experience. Get the full story at www.levitybrewing.com. So what are some of the mistakes that you've seen event planners fall prey to when putting their events together?
Holy cow.
Do you want to start on that one?
Man,
Sure.
Meg's got a lot
I just
to
feel
say.
like I've made so many mistakes.
I was going to
that-
say I want to talk. I want to
Oh, wait.
talk about my own mistakes.
I know, I was
Yeah,
going to say, like,
yeah, none of us
not
are-
mistakes, learning opportunities.
Yeah,
There you go.
it's how you build experience.
Let's change the
none of us,
conversation.
none of us have gone through this without making mistakes. But what are some that you've seen? Yeah, what are some that you've experienced yourself?
I think, like, in hitting on knowing your audience is that, like, knowing what they actually wanted. I feel like with Brutal, especially in our first year, like, I looked at it as, and I did things based on, I think, more so what I thought I would want out of that event. And that was my first mistake. You know, hired a band that I love to pieces and I think were a great hire, but, like, not as many of the consumers knew who they were. So not realizing that. And Brutal's, like, where I made a lot of mistakes. So it's going to be my main example, but, like, realizing that it might not be as much about, like, the craft beer as it is about the music. We build and grow the festival is that our music mattered a little bit more, and our consumers, I knew walking into it that we were going to be creating new craft beer consumers, but I instantly still thought, oh, we're going to have like 50-50 here. Like, it's going to be a 50-50 thing. And it's not. It wasn't. So all of our marketing, all of the preparation and what the festival was had to adjust a little bit. Let me see. I had a list here.
Meg came prepared.
And then part of it was, like, not, we didn't put enough, I personally do believe in paying for social media a little bit in certain ways, in different aspects, not putting more money into our marketing. And that was, I think, early on, like the first year, I used Canva the entire time. And if you look at all of our first year, you'll be like, yeah, no, that was terrible. Like, so no one told me it was terrible, but reflecting, it was pretty bad because of the next year we started working with Brian Howe, and he killed it on our marketing. But not only that, in our third year,
Not to trash Canva or anything, but
No, I'm trashing. No, it was me. I'm trashing myself and my
Okay.
skill design. I have more of an eye for it than the skill set. Let's be real.
okay, fair enough.
Yeah, so in our third year, we did hire someone who could help generate more likes for us and would help, like, basically they used algorithms associated with certain accounts that had audiences that we wanted, and that's kind of how we generated inorganic growth for us, but at the same time it generated more traction, which I think created more organic growth, which again, it's part of the algorithms. More interaction, the more you're going to get more. We hired them to create hashtags specific that would help generate more promotion on our Instagram. So stuff like that, like, we ended up doing, and I felt like helped grow some of our social media presence, which at the end of the day, whether or not this past year was the most effective as far as generating ticket sales, I still felt like the next step when we start growing more, when the way people look at accounts and the way you have traction, you can get more organic growth based off of having that base layer of, okay, I already see they have like 5K likes. It might help us get sponsors. It might help us get more likes in that whole setting. And we have more people we can interact with, which interaction creates more traction to your site. So again, there's so many different things. We didn't put enough money into marketing the first couple of years.
Yeah.
We did that. I think it actually was a little bit helpful for us. I'm going to pause and let you take over if you want to.
Yeah, I feel like there's just so many different aspects to touch on this. Things that I've done, things that I've seen. One thing that I definitely, and Meg will be taking over this aspect of my job, getting all of the requests to every little beer festival, every big beer festival, so many different requests coming through to be involved in. And one thing that I noticed, like, right away is, like, if somebody doesn't have a clear mission statement. I had to do this beer event because we need to raise money for the Rotary. And so we're doing this beer event, and please come to it. Please, we're begging you. And you're just like, oh, okay, this is dripping with desperation. This is clearly not a beer industry person, and that's a red flag right away. And with those, kind of on that topic, like, when people do these events, it can be very clear that this wasn't designed by a beer person. This wasn't, when you're not having the right resources for your breweries and your vendors. I've been to plenty of events where we don't have dump buckets, we don't have water for rinsing, and it's confusing for the vendors and it's confusing for the consumers because we've developed this culture of expectations going to these different events. So I feel like when people try to do something like that and they fail, it just is. But with that mission statement, you have to give people a reason to care. And if it isn't very clear, I feel like events like Brutal Beer Fest, Fresh Fest, things like that have very clear branding and mission statements that you understand what the event is. Yeah. If that's confusing, it's going to be hard to get your consumers to care about that. Just lack of planning, is a huge thing. Will your space fit the amount of people that you're looking to host?
That's huge. Scout out your space first and then figure out how many tickets you can sell, because overselling is the worst.
And I was going to say too, with that same topic, is like with your space, know that they're going to tell you their max capacity, but you need to include your tables and your vendors that are already going to be there.
We've been to plenty of events where we do not have the parking. The vendor parking is super far away and you're carrying kegs and then is it accessible to, Uber, Lyft? Is that going to be easy for people to get in and out? Bathrooms. That's like one of my lines for the bathrooms. Yeah. People sometimes don't think about it. That's porta potties am I going to need for 400 people? It's a hard thing to do, but a lot of that is just like going into the planning thing. Yeah. Really diving into the numbers, talking to people that have experience doing it. It doesn't hurt to find out what they've done in the past.
Can I bounce off of just so I don't go kind of coming back? But talking about your mistakes that I also made, that as far as delegating responsibilities and having very clear defined roles, but also having that point person to organize the information so it's in like one central location. It was something in the first few years that I've definitely struggled with, and having expectations for people, things where no one's getting paid to do anything. And that's hard to say, hey, well, you said you're going to do this, but I'm not paying you, so whatever, you didn't do the work. Darn, I guess I'll having people that you can trust on your team and also delegating properly, and then having still that one key point person to organize it all and keep everyone else accountable is really, really important, I think, with any event. But if you're thinking beer fest size, it's even more important.
Yeah, having that all planned out. You're working with your vendors that are providing I've been to different events that ice shows up an hour after the event starts and everybody's pouring warm beer. Where's your ice, people? Where's your tables and your chairs? Things like that are, I think a lot of the times we make those transactions and then we just assume that it's going to happen. Yeah. I've learned several times that you have to follow up on it. Last year, our tent situation, that was like the biggest thing that really just to this day wakes me up in the middle of the night about our beer fest last year, was our tents from our vendor. We got the wrong sizes. When they got there, they didn't have enough weights for us to actually put the tents in the places they had to be staked into the ground. So all the time that I had spent on developing our layout of our vendors, weeks, was completely I literally threw my map in the trash because the tents that I had show up were my planogram. Yeah. And that just really, you have to understand that these things are going to change on the fly. That was 8:00 in the morning, a few hours before our Brewfest started. And I had to figure out where I was putting 3 breweries and other vendors. And that was really hard. So being able to think on your feet when those situations happen.
And I will say, too, talking about the organization of the festival, what I learned in this last year was I think being able to think on the fly is really clutch, but creating a team where you have the space to do that. Like this year, we decided to hire stewards of beer, so shout out to them, to manage all of the volunteers, because last year when I was doing Brutal, I had people consistently coming up to me and like, what do I do? And I'm like, I don't know. I need to go run over here. You go do this, so I didn't think I was the second year. I wasn't as effective with utilizing the people that were there to help, able to kind of step back from that. And I was like, nope, these are your point people. And it changed everything for me. It really allowed me more time to problem solve as needed, but also be proactive. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was really key too.
One of the big things I think that can help just smooth the path of the whole day is making sure that you are taking care of your vendors from the start to finish. So when they arrive, they know the process of where to unload, where they need to go. You have it clearly planned out. And like Lauren said, this can change. If a change were to happen, you're able to communicate that effectively. But in a perfect world, let's say everything went according to plan, vendors need to know where to go, when they can set up, when they can arrive. If you can make that process easier from the start, it just makes the whole day flow easier, because then you avoid people running up and asking questions and trying to figure things out on.
Rules are good, as you know, and getting that information out earlier, but also know that brewers don't always actually look at that stuff in detail. I've definitely been guilty of it.
So and they're always late.
And having point people. So in the two,
I was saying perfect world scenario.
Yeah. So we had, for Brittle, we had 2 different load-in zones depending on where the brewers were going to be. Having people always there during the load-in time, because they're still going to come up and be like, where do I go? Yeah. So like, yes, definitely getting information, but having point people to help direct his.
But yeah, taking care of your vendors is. I did an event once that was outdoors in 85-degree heat, and they were trying to sell us water. They wouldn't just give us water. And that was the last time I did that event. Yeah, because it's little things like that. Maybe I'm pickier than some, but it's like, dude, I'm pouring beer for your guests here. You can't give me a bottle of water? Okay, screw you. You won't see me here again.
I love like what you're saying, but not totally saying, is that the person putting on the event is selling you as a brewery. Yeah. Like you have to look at it as like, I'm paying these brewers to buy their beer to sell it to my consumer. It's like for us, I still had to look at it for the bands too. We need to have incentives for our bands. Like it's the same dynamic. I'm the one hosting this event. I'm the one reaping any sort of benefit from it. So the turnaround is that I need to look at my brewers and bands or whoever else is coming as, not royalty is a terrible word to use it, but as someone that you need to take care of.
Yeah. It's important to point out too, for anytime you're reaching out, not so much on the band side, but on the vendor side, for if you're getting breweries involved, chances are they were invited to 2 other festivals that same weekend.
Hell yeah.
And if they weren't, that's a break for them, because there's so many happening. You want to be one that they want to come to and they're excited about. If you're just putting something on for the hell of it, I know Meg, you referenced this earlier. Or I'm sorry, Lauren, you referenced this earlier. If you're just throwing it together and really not planning it out properly, no one's going to be excited to come to that event. And if they do come once, if it's poorly ran, they're not going to come back. So it makes it harder to repeat your event.
Absolutely. I love the whole idea of like taking care. Like if you have people traveling, get them gas cards. Yeah. Yep. If you're having people there for a long day, feed them. Right. Food and water should really never be a thing that people have to worry about. Next.
We're good? Okay.
I always like talking about like specific events without, we talked about the one that used all of our logos. And I think I was trying to figure out how to word that in a sense of, because one thing that I did experience last year was, I heard through the grapevine from other people, somebody would come to me and say, oh, this brewery is coming to Brewfest. And so I put them on the list. Okay, they're coming. And then when we got our shirts printed with everybody's names on them, we had the marketing out there, and breweries are reaching out to me saying, hey, we're not coming to this. Yeah. And that was, not fun. And so, but I didn't want them to perceive us as, hey, we just like threw you on the list, just assuming that you were coming here. Like, I thought I got that confirmation that you guys were coming. But that's happened to us with different events where people put our logos up there and we had not confirmed that we were going to be there. And then consumers are then pissed that we were told that we were going to be there. And so I've been on both ends of that. And I feel like that can hurt your event and then hurt your brand as well.
I think we both dealt with this in ways too, like talking about doing like whether or not you have breweries on like a shirt or something like that, but also like if we're talking about merchandise, and I don't know if we're going to a different topic now, but like as Brutal, we kind of decided after the fact that like we had such beautiful art, but like once you create something that's branded for a specific year event, like that merch is now half price the day after. Yeah, right. So like that's like
$5 2018 Brewfest tees like, now available at Yappy Hour.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was like a mistake we made. We actually decided that after this year, like not branding things for a specific year. Like even if you have a specific art for a specific year, leave years off. Leave numbers off. Yeah. So that you can still make the money back on those items and you're not losing it.
Having flexible branding.
It's a good call.
A little bit more vague definitely helps.
Well, let's stay on that subject to some degree. How important do you guys feel it is to have the vendors looped into the entire planning process?
I've never really felt like, as far as planning goes, unless they're someone who is integral part of, like, if they're going to be a focus of your promotion. Say, like, for us, we did big brewery and band collaborations. So, like, for us, getting our, like, the people who are at, like, you know, Dying Fetus and Weyerbacher, it was really important for me to have them have the best marketing that they could possibly have. On the other ends, I think that would probably be actually where I stop when it comes to that, but you might have a different view.
No, I feel like mainly with our planning process, I'm doing the planning, I'm relaying to them the information. If they have feedback on certain things, then I'll take that. But I don't think I've really had any of our vendors a part of the planning process besides just...
Well, what I mean by that question is when I think about some events that I've participated in, you get the invite, you say, yeah, I'd like to be a part of this. Great, we'll put you on the list. And you never hear from them again.
Yeah.
So you don't know... How much beer am I supposed to bring? How many tickets are being sold?
Yeah.
Like, what should I expect day of?
I think that's a good thing, because usually there is that lull. Like, you get the initial ask and you're like, hey, I need the form. Having been someone who's always like relaying with the breweries, you know, it's that initial ask and then following up if they didn't fill out their form and so on and so forth. But I always, if everyone gets everything back to me, like I got their form, I got the okay, you know, I got their logo, I say, hey, we'll be following up closer to the event, you know, giving them that information so there's an expectation of when you're going to hear something back.
That's good, yes.
And if I didn't say that to them, they're always knocking down my door a couple months out.
Yeah. I mean, but I even think like, you know, a month ahead of the event, you have but most of our ticket sales for larger events are happening the last 2 weeks before the event. So I think maybe last year I might have sent out like a month, maybe 3 weeks email out to all of our vendors and breweries, basically stating like, hey, this is how many, you know, people we're expecting. This is kind of the beer that we're expecting to keep us floating throughout the day, and a reminder on load-in times and all of those information, because sometimes the people that originally signed up for that event may not be with the company. You know, there is some revolving aspect of it. So I've been on that end of it where they've told the sales rep before me that, you know, given them that information, and then I'm searching for that where it pops up where it's like, oh, hey, you have this information.
Yeah.
So I think it is important to keep your vendors, you know, giving them that information throughout the time so that they're prepared for that.
And I don't think you have to do it weekly or anything to that. I mean, you could if you want to be thorough, but I think most people would just be happy with, you know, leading up to the event. They know what's expected of them, and they know what kind of crowd to expect, because I'm going to refer back to that event where I couldn't get water. They didn't tell anybody. I'm not going to name the event by name, but they sold 250 tickets overnight on Groupon. Didn't tell anybody. So now I'm out of beer in an hour.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Which, from the, you know, the recreational side of myself, liked it, because I was like, cool, I can go around and hang out and just drink now. But while I was tearing down, I just got MF'd up and down by everybody. Like, how could you not plan for this? Sorry, no one told me what was going on.
Yeah, and the other side too, like especially to bring it back to marketing in a way, and something Brutal's always done is that we've always created assets. So we make it part of the schedule of when do we want breweries to possibly help us promote. And and again, I think it's key with like when you do look at marketing, having a schedule and a calendar saying we're going to push this week, so on and so forth. So that's what I'm saying. But when I email those out, a lot of the times too, I'll just like have brand specific item or assets that they can push, and I make it optional too, but that'll be another time to touch base. And I've had people at that point too be like, oh, hey, is there anything else, you know, we need to know right now? And that's when I push them off like, hey, I'll get that email out now, you know, and this timeline.
I think that's a great, I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Lauren?
No, you're good.
I think that's a great step, is to create those assets for them. So not only do you have some control over how your event's being promoted, but you're also basically doing the work for them. And it's just a nice, simple ask of, hey, I got this tweet. Can you put it out for me just to keep generating buzz?
Asking your friends to help you.
Absolutely.
You know, and you can do it on any level, whether it's the brewery or actually like a pal, or the people who are vending items, like, you know, we've talked about like First Sip Brew Box, Allegheny Scenic Farms, you know, something like that where they're selling an item. You can create assets for them, and they want more people coming to buy their stuff while they're there. So getting those assets too is helpful for them too. So
do you guys have a routine that you do day of that again, we've already discussed how things can slightly go awry unexpectedly. But do you go into your event with a routine of knowing this is how I'm going to attack this today, or do you just let it fly?
For brutal, I start my day off with bathing in pig's blood and really get the day. I'm just joking.
You're not joking. Shut up.
Totally joking. I don't know. I mean, I'm like one of those people, like, I need lists, we need a plan, and I know when things are happening. So I like that the most. So then when I show up, it's pretty much unload and then asking everyone to get everything where it needs to go. Other than that, I mean, it's always been kind of on the fly a little bit. Do you have a better...
I think it's like event specific. I'm a big fan of lists as well, and large post-it note boards that I can write things on. Last year, that was a big, like I had that up in the morning. I went in and I made a list of everything that still needed to be done for that day. And I kind of gave a couple people different jobs and said, hey, I have this list right here. If you're looking for something to do one of these things, mark it off the list when you're done with it. And then I could go back periodically and check throughout the day. And that was an easy way to direct people, because a lot of the times everything's in your mind. You don't have little pieces of paper that you can hand out to everybody. And if your team's kind of spread out, and there's a lot of the time we had a good group of people. We have a lot of volunteers that show up and they want to help. So being able to give them things to do. But I think like in the beginning of the day, it's just kind of like mentally preparing yourself to just have organized chaos for the rest of the day.
And having point people for that too. What I found was really beneficial is using like a headset of sorts, so that if I had certain people having them on that like I knew I could rely on, like, hey, I need this. Where are you at? Like, who's close to this person? And like, that really, really helped as well. Which I'm gonna make a joke that this year for like the North Country Beer Fest, we should go to CNC Malt and get one of their big school chalkboards.
Ooh, yes.
They've actually hasn't checked out CNC Malt. They're amazing people and awesome, but they're like in a school, so they have all these school resources.
Yeah, I'm gonna have them on a show here in a couple weeks. I get to go up and do a tour and
they're great.
Sit down with Brendan and
well, then you can grab us.
You want me to grab the chalkboard for you? All right, I'll load it in the back.
It's great. Anywho.
I'm sure it'll load greatly in the back of my Nissan Sentra.
Just tow it behind you. It's that big.
Just drag it. Yeah. If you're only using it once, I guess it doesn't have to look too great.
I think like for the day itself, having an idea of your times of when things need to be done and ready by. I need the first band to be set up by this time. I need the brewers to be set up by this time.
Yeah.
I need, our food to be available to purchase at this time. Having clear times for things to be ready makes it a little bit easier instead of people kind of standing around like, okay, when are we going? When are we going live?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a tremendous point. I actually just did an event a few weeks ago where the itinerary came the day before, and it was literally from 9 a.m. till the end of the event. They had everything mapped out, and that was, most of that didn't involve the vendors because we showed up around like 5. Everything beforehand that this group had it laid out for this is awesome. This is when this person will arrive. This is when this. I was like, wow, this is very well done.
Ooh, I would love to just see that itinerary.
I have it.
Excited and nerdy.
I'll totally show you after this is over. Since this is an audio medium, it won't do much good for me to show it to you now.
Holding it up won't do.
But no, very detailed and very organized, and the event was great. It was very well run and couldn't have been done any better.
That's really cool. I love that too, especially since and having just a couple people who are floating that might not have specific concrete tasks, but at any given point you're like, hey, go do this for me, or some people one of the bands I had at our second year, the drummer of this band, he did his own metal event, and he was such a really good point person for me to bounce ideas off of what I should have. And even if you have if you're the main person running the show, having just almost like an assistant just on at any given point that could either field everything that's coming into you and then filter it to you, or just be that person that you can have run, depending on your size, it might not even matter. But if you're talking about 500 to 1,000 person event, you're going to need that point person to help you.
Last year, that was my mom. My mom offered to volunteer, and she ended up being my assistant.
That's great.
Yeah. She was good at it.
For sure.
So outside of the events that you guys have run yourself, because we don't want to pat ourselves on the back, but what is one of the best organized and executed events that you've ever attended? You don't have to call it out by name, but maybe even I mean, you could talk about some aspects that event had that really stood out to you.
I've always loved going to Beers of the Berg. I think that was like one of my lists, that because I think Mark and his wife have such a awesome system that from top to bottom we walk in, and they also have they've always had great volunteers. And again, it harkens back to asking your friends, getting the people you trust who believe in what you're doing, who are going to help you execute it, because they're not going to want to screw up anything for you. Right. I've never once felt like I didn't have what I needed at any given point at one of their festivals.
I will say the same. Since day one, I remember being at the very first one. It's like, wow, that this was so well done. I mean, I'm sure they had some growing pains, but we didn't necessarily see it on the surface, which was great.
I don't know. I feel like there's always flaws in every event. You can always find different things. There's something lacking in everything, but I don't know. I feel like I've been to a lot of really good beer fests. There's obviously ones in our area that have been going on for a long time.
Maybe it would be easier to...
I think we talked about that a while ago. We mentioned that one that you walk in, you're just like, I love how they organize the whole space by region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thought that was always really cool.
I think last year they changed that.
Oh, really?
Last year, I think they might have changed that up and done just alphabetical. But either way, you have 90,000 square feet of space, and the fact that they can organize it in any way is, I mean, and they find all of those volunteers. I mean, it's been going on for almost 20 years, over 20 years.
Right.
And, they're able to lock down enough volunteers for 4 sessions. All of the judges that are a part of that whole aspect. I mean, they have a couple hundred judges for that. And it's always a great experience for a brewer. Yeah. It's like one of those stereotypical, okay, everybody needs to go to GABF once, but it really is an experience, and they really do take care of everybody.
Are you looking for a better way to attack your social media efforts? Do you need help developing a plan that will help you maximize your initiatives? Do you feel like you're doing nothing but wasting time on sites like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then it's time for a jumpstart. Check out the Breaking Brews social media jumpstart and discover an easy way for us to join forces and take your business to new levels. From a complete analysis of your current presence to an intensive strategy session designed to develop and execute your plan of attack, the Social Media Jumpstart is a great way to build a foundation that will lead to long-term results. To learn more, visit www.breakingbrews.com/jumpstart today. Well, let's flip the coin a little bit. What's one of the worst?
About to get angry here. One of my
angsty podcast goes angsty.
Let's lay this place down. I've really had a lot of distaste for Pittsburgh Beer Fest. The only thing I'll give them a pat on the back because they do a lot of charity work, and especially related to animals. So that, it's the only redeeming thing that I like about what they do. But I feel like the culture about what they're doing with the beer industry it's the exact opposite of the beer industry. It's a joke almost. People go there to get so drunk.
Yeah.
People puking on escalators, and but that's the vibe. And the other side of it is that they are a very digestible beer event. So people who might not be super into craft beer will go, but are they actually making them better craft beer drinkers? Craft beer, or I don't really know what it is. I just think it's a joke, and I think it's very distasteful to the beer industry, that we're not cultivating a more responsible beer drinking experience.
There was White Claw there last year or this past year.
Yeah.
That's not something that is helping us as brands kind of develop.
But I also, as an organizer with Brutal, I felt a personal responsibility to make sure my consumers were safe.
I think one of the biggest, we definitely need to talk about safety, but in reference to that beer festival, I think so.
Yes.
I think there's a big difference. We talked about Beers of the Berg, and we're talking about Pittsburgh Beer Fest. It's hard to find a parallel between those two because I think that the directives are so different.
Yeah. But why though? I asked why.
Well,
why?
That's a very good question. I think it's more rhetorical than anything. I think it's a hard one to answer. I think that, for me, I think this does come down to safety, but I looked at somebody taking a picture of, it was the most recent one or last year, the winter one of like a vertical of the Big Bad Baptist Imperial Stouts, which are like 12 or 13%. What are those doing in that? Like, you have 3 or 4 of those and everybody's going to try that, and come on, I mean, you're going to get people really fucked up.
I think the locations and volume too are why the distributors are involved.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, you can't
absolutely.
having the convention center, having a bunch of breweries loading in their own stuff.
Certainly.
You know, so
Certainly.
there are.
I have 2 things to add to that too. And I don't think it hasn't always been distributor focused, because like I've been to 2 of the I've been to a summer one and a winter one, and I'm like, there were definitely brewers that I knew there pouring, but I think over time, because we see the culture of that event going the where it is, that most of us are backing out of it.
Yeah.
Like anyone who's going is probably a new brewery because they want to get in front of that crowd that's so big. And second, like that was also another thing that really threw me off, is the first year I went with Rock Bottom, or second year, and we were not being poured by our distributor and we just had our own table. No one could tell me where to go. I was like, downtown, I'm like, they're like, yeah, go around this corner and go up this ramp. I'm like, okay. And I'm driving around. I'm like trying to call the point person, and no one could help me. And it was very frustrating. So I went and parked and walked in, like those type of things, talking about the functionality of it. Like that was a miss for me. And again, it was the last time I was like, I do not want my beer anywhere near this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm talking shit, but that's fine. That's, and again, it's the why. I think it's definitely volume for sure.
Yeah.
I think an event like that is they're always going to sell out, because there always is going to be that crowd that is going to go, and they're just going to go to drink. They're not. That's why I think as we talked about, or Meg, you talked about a local brewery that really wants to get noticed and put on that stage where there's tons of people. Are they going to get noticed? Because are they just going to become another brewery that's there because people are going place to place and station to station, drinking as much as they can? It may be almost a moot point that you're there on this stage, but you're not going to get remembered when it's all over. I can make an
assumption that it might be a 50-50, because I still think people who go there, like, they're going to be a mix. They're probably going with a group of people where 1 or 2 of the people is really into craft beer and the other ones might not be as much. But yeah, so there's still going to be people who are into craft beer there. So I'm not saying that that's not a thing. So I think, like, for a new brewery, yeah, it could be beneficial for a year. I do see that, but in the long run, I just don't know. Because, I mean, maybe coming back the next year, they might not get as much attention.
I think we were just recently at a local one that the venue was not brewery friendly. They had, our beer was like our coolers were like sweating on the ground, creating puddles. They didn't have water for us. They didn't have ice for us. We had to like run it was very hot in there. So we had to run to the gas station multiple times to get our own ice, which we didn't know that ahead of time. Wow. So it was something that we couldn't plan for. They had 3 different cups. They had told us previously in the emails that it would be 8-ounce cups, but you could fill them halfway. When we got there and they started letting people in, we immediately had somebody coming up with a plastic cup with a red little like plastic ramekin, like a 2-ounce ramekin with a red ticket. We had an 8-ounce glass cup and a 12-ounce metal mug. And my first thought was, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? Like, there were nobody told us anything about this. So we did run out of beer early because most people were buying these 12-ounce mugs and getting full pours of beer. And that was something that so I had to, right in the beginning of the beer festival, had to run up to whoever looked like they were in charge and say, what is the cup situation? Nobody, and I went to every brewery on my way back and told them, because nobody else was, kind of explaining that to them. So I think we've done a lot of different events where the guidelines are not clear, and that it makes it frustrating for everybody.
I think the worst one that I've ever done, I'm going to keep this short because I could go on for a while, but I don't want to take up too much airtime with this story. But we were in an event where the first day didn't go as well as the organizer had hoped. So she put it all on Groupon and sold all these tickets for like $10 overnight without the glassware to do it. So now people are getting plastic cups, like solo cups, and wine glasses for the wine end of this. And she's going around telling every vendor, fill it to the very top because I got to get rid of all this beer. And she came to me and said that. I'm like, fuck you. No way am I doing that. Yeah. That's not how you do this. So she's like, well, that's what we have to do. I got to get rid of this beer. So now I went to every vendor personally and said, don't do that. And it was funny. The people that she had as volunteers were like, well, they told us to. All the brewers were like, yeah, we understand. We're not doing that. And it was horrible. By the end of the day, everybody was just a sloppy mess. And it was that's another one of those events I said, I can't even see this happening again, let alone me coming back to be a part of it. I think that segues perfectly into talking about safety and making sure that you've got an event where people are going to naturally imbibe and probably to the wrong degree or too much of a degree. How are you going to take care of them? Do you have systems in place like Uber and Lyft? Do you have partnerships with a bus program that might be able to get people in and out? Do they have designated drivers? There's lots of different things to look at here. Mm-hmm. What have you guys implemented to make sure that your guests are safe after they leave your event?
I think making sure they're safe started with the festival itself. So the first couple of years of Brutal, we decided that we wanted to do like a ticketing program, which I had seen first when I was living in Oregon, and I liked it. But out there, it was structured. It was known that this is how this works. Yeah. So trying to implement it here kind of was a little bit of a wash. Brewers were like, oh, I don't care about your ticket. Here, give me a beer. So... Yeah. But what we also realized too is that, you're looking at your culture and your climate of what you're harnessing too. For us, it did work a little bit better because there was the music aspect. There was different purpose to it. And, people weren't necessarily there just to get drunk. They were there to hang out and have a good show, or like to watch a good show and drink some great craft beer. So I think depending on how you approach your event, you can harness a certain culture of how you want your consumers to behave. We realized in our third year, we could open the bar, let people have liquor if they wanted, and we didn't need to do ticketing, and we had minimal issues. And again, it spoke to our culture. We have always worked with some sort of transportation group. I've worked specifically with Z-Trip a couple times, and they kind of were like a little bit of a sponsor. But having that available, I don't know how much people use it, but you can do that through promotion. Get people in the mindset that depending on how your parking situation is, make sure you Uber, carpool, have a designated driver. And having a cheap ticket to have a designated driver there too is huge, so that they can, and then take care of them too. The second year we offered a food ticket with the designated driver. Give it an incentive to have that person there.
That's a great add-on for sure.
Trying to think. Other than that, yeah, again, you can control all of that through your marketing as well. You can post multiple times throughout your entire marketing period, where you just post that, let people know, we're conscious of who's going to be here and how people are getting around.
I think, ramp certifications are kind of a newer thing in Pennsylvania. In Texas, you were required to have that, and beer festivals would actually hire companies that had ramp certified people. Mm-hmm. So I think making sure that the people that are pouring the beer are aware of the responsibility that they hold of taking care of the people that are there. You have to be able to cut somebody off if they're drinking too much. Mm-hmm. That's something that I'm always skeptical of when we do these bigger beer fests and they provide volunteers to you. How do I know that they're ramp certified? How do I know that they're not going to overserve somebody with my product? And then am I liable for that?
Right.
So I think understanding the laws, understanding how to properly serve alcohol to people, and being able to recognize when somebody is inebriated. That's not the point of our events. So, and that goes, a lot of that goes into your culture of what you're trying to do. Yeah. Slippery Rock, we struggled last year finding rideshare people that would come up to Slippery Rock because we don't have Uber, we don't have Lyft. So we had a local dealership was considered a sponsor and provided shuttles for us that would take you to Main Street, where a lot of people lived, where it was all walkable kind of distance, or was taking them to our brew pub where they could go and get some food. Yeah. So we did sponsor with a shuttle for that, and that helped us out a lot.
Well, to piggyback on what both of you said, I think we've all seen it at beer festivals where people are inebriated, but they feel they still need more because they paid for that ticket, and it's a tough conversation to have, because you look at it if you're looking at it from that personal standpoint, it's like, well, this isn't my event, I'm just here as a vendor. But at the same time, when we speak to the culture as a whole, it is our responsibility to say, listen, you've had a good time today. Do you have a ride home? And that's I've talked to people about this before, asking them when you can tell they're visibly too intoxicated, Do you have a way out of here? Can we help you in any way? Can I get you, that's something I've never really seen, but I think it could be valuable as if there is partnerships with Uber or Lyft, if the cards are at the table for each vendor to hand out just in case. Like, here, look, here's someone you can call. Here, you get 20% off your ride. Just make sure or not call, but, use your app, whatever. But
And the other side, like, not to keep like bumping Stewards of Beer because they're not sponsoring the show, but they could.
It's been a productive session. I like this.
No, but I mean, for us though, putting the responsibility in someone who is responsible for that type of stuff, where like they could possibly bring in people. Because I remember at one of our Pink Boots meetings, Brooke specifically talked about like ramp certification, and like they obviously hire people who do serve beer, so it's important to them. You could hire someone like that. Could be a thing that you ask of someone like that. Or if you are yourself a restaurant and you provide your own volunteers, whether they are your servers you're able to pull, or you bring in volunteers, you could pay for that to make sure that's like part of the whole thing. It takes more planning, more scheduling, a little bit more money, but again, I can't stress enough that it is your responsibility to make sure your consumers are safe. Alcohol is amazing, but it's also very dangerous.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Well, a couple more things I wanted to touch on before we get ready to wrap up here. I know we were talking about the importance of having vendors, or at least keeping vendors in the loop in regards to the planning process, but we didn't necessarily touch on the sponsors side of it. What has been your experience keeping sponsors involved, and how important do you feel that is to the execution of your event?
Well, I mean, that's a big part of planning. How much capital do you have to do your event, and so are you in need of sponsors, or do you need some, or do you need all of your money from your sponsors? So I think that's something to really look into. We have, with our North Country Beer Fest, we have different levels of sponsorships, and some of them are people providing services like the shuttle, or it's some people that are actually providing, money for us to be able to do things, funding our glassware that's being provided. That's a sponsorship level for us. Banners, signage, things like that, a lot of the purpose of a lot of our events is to raise money for charity. So those sponsors really help us offset that cost to be able to raise a little bit more money for whatever cause we're working with. But it's important I think one thing we've definitely learned is aligning with companies that are more reflective of our branding. We don't need to take sponsors from every little company that we don't really have relationships with. So who do we have partnerships with already that we can kind of both benefit from them being a sponsor?
I've always felt like sponsorships are a nightmare. But they're a necessity in certain cases. And I like how she broke it down. Like, you really have to reflect on what you need. And for me personally, it pushed me out of my comfort zone in so many ways to try to solicit sponsors and, really go to them and saying, this is what I want to do and I need your help in different ways, but I want to offer something back to you. And that's always how I approached it, because like, we aren't personally a nonprofit. This past year was the first year we were able to work with a charity. So the first 2 years, we didn't have that not angle, I hate using that word, but like that side of like, yeah, we want to give to a charity, but we don't have that going on. So we really had to push like, hey, we have this dream and we have this passion and we want you to be part of it. So going at it as from an angle of you're getting something from someone, but you need to give them back something too. And a lot of the times we've lucked out in that we've had partnerships who they believe in us as people, and that's been really cool. And they believe in like the event we're doing. They know that no matter what, we're going to push their brand in every angle that we can, because we want to turn around and give them business based on our consumers. And that's always been how I focus, because I also kind of feel bad taking money from people in ways, but we knew that with this festival, to make it at least break even and try to come out a little bit ahead so that we can do this again, that we needed money coming in. But we also wanted to translate that in thinking about our consumer. I didn't want ticket prices to be skyrocketed. Briefly touching back on that, our consumers look at this more as like a festival versus a beer festival and music festival. So I knew the ticketing price had to align more so with what they would expect out of a music festival and make sure the value is there for that. So to keep us from having to skyrocket our ticket prices to account for both sides, you know, those sponsors are really important. And, you know, we want to make it accessible. We want to create new craft beer drinkers. And I think like the passion behind both like really matter to us. So it's really hard. And I don't think there's any rhyme or reason specifically. Yeah, if you do align more with the charity, I almost think it's a little bit easier. And I think, at the end of the day, support a charity too with your events. Like that always is great because you're going to do good. And that's always cool. Know your purpose, know your audience, know what you need to do and what you want to do. Don't go into it willy-nilly. And the sponsors will be there eventually.
Do you feel that there are too many beer festivals these days?
I mean, it's so hard. That's
You gotta add the video element to this because those facial expressions were awesome.
It's kind of hard. I mean, that's like asking the question, are there too many breweries right now?
Yeah.
You know, I feel like there are a lot of beer festivals, but I don't feel like, you know, I don't know that there can ever be too many. I feel like people need to be more strategic with them. My answer is there's too many shitty beer festivals.
If this is going to be something that's out there, it is along the same theme of, you know, there's a lot of bad breweries out there too. We don't want that. We want everyone to excel and be good and be an asset to their community. And every beer festival that comes out, as long as it's serving that purpose, it can be good. Yeah,
and I think too, like, I mean, in general, I like touching on like, oh, is it hearkening like, is there too many breweries? But is there too many beer events? Like, I think it touches on that. Is like, you still need to differentiate yourself. You still need to offer something unique. And again, you need to know why you're doing it, not just, oh, I'm doing this because I know it can raise money for something.
Right.
You know, I think you're going to get more support when you like reflect on why you actually want to do that, because you can have beer at any event and probably find one or two breweries that want to support that. You don't need to do a full-fledged beer fest.
Right.
You just don't. You can do other unique things, and that could be a whole other podcast of unique beer events. So
maybe we'll do that sometime.
Yeah, so I would definitely say know why you're doing it and be able to relay that, and maybe reflect that you don't need to always make it big beer events.
And things spread quickly through our industry. Like, I've had several conversations with other brewers and other breweries about, hey, these people reached out about this event. Are you doing it? No, there was no organization. I mean, actually, I'm thinking about going back to like, you know, the worst events and stuff like that. We opted out of being a part of a festival up in Butler that wanted to charge us, I think it was like $8,000 to sell our beer, but there was $8,000.
3 zeros.
It was going to be like 20,000 people at this event all weekend. And so they had a larger like AB brand beer sponsor that was also selling alcohol. And then I said no, I said no, absolutely not. Okay, well, what if we bring it down to 6,000? No, absolutely not. You are trying to charge me. I'm like, you don't understand how much beer I will need to sell. And their whole thing was, well, if you're going to sell beer, then we need to get paid for that too. And we kept saying no, kept saying no, kept saying no. And what I heard before the event was they invited other local breweries to go and pour for free right before the event. So it got to that point where nobody was biting. And I did reach out to these other breweries and said, do not pay them. Do not pay them, because if we all kind of are on the same page, then we'll keep that from happening.
Was everybody that was pouring for free, were they able to sell?
So they did sell, but they didn't make very much money. Okay. It was pretty much a wash.
So not 20,000 people over the course.
There was not 20,000 people at all. Not anywhere close to that.
Was this like a charity at all? Like, no. Okay, so that's the other thing too. I want to make a point to say, like, if someone's asking you for money in any way, shape, or form, whether it's a percentage of sales or a fee to vend your beer, I feel like the charity aspect is more important. You have to really reflect, like, why would I actually be here when I have like my own tap room that I can sell this beer at?
There was there was some like bacon and bourbon fest or whatever. This was maybe like 2 years ago, and it was like the same weekend as the Rib Fest at Heinz Field, and they were like, oh yeah, come for like $15,000, you can come and sell your beer at this large event. And it was like, no, you have no sense of, you trying to sell me on that is showing me that you have no idea what you're doing.
I have to think that it's almost extinct for a festival where you're charging a brewery to come out to even come on.
We're getting paid to be
off.
there.
It's an asset for them to have you there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That used to be the pitch years ago. This is a great chance to expose your brand to all these people, and you'll have to pay us X for a vendor fee. Everybody's pretty down
How
with
about
craft
I
beer.
bring an
now.
expo license right outside of your event and then sell my product
sell-
right there.
Yeah.
And then I don't have to give you anything.
Breweries have tried to live off of exposure for several years, and nobody was able to live off of exposure.
Well,
I am
We
so
need-
rich on exposure right
Yeah.
now. It's amazing.
I talked to a brewery that had the best response. Somebody wanted them to donate a keg, and their response was, cool. I can't remember the companies, but I know there was food product involved. Like, cool, can you donate me a case of chicken for my Friday dinner?
Yes.
Like, well, no, we can't do that. Like, okay, we can't donate you beer because
Yeah.
this is
Right.
our asset.
Such a weird
And-
thing
Yeah.
how people don't value what like our product and like it's I don't can we talk about that for 2 seconds like
Sure.
why why that's a thing.
I think
re-
it ties in perfectly to this subject.
I really think that it has a lot to do with the craft beer industry being on the up and up, and we can't exactly say that in numbers wise, or like reflective of the Brewers Association. We're kind of like flatlining right now, but the perception of our industry, people think that, oh, I hear this all the time, oh, there's a lot of money in craft beer. Like, people see North Country, they think we're this huge company and we're making a shit ton of money off of selling our beer, and they think that I heard one time that our owner had like a private jet that he like flew to Florida, and like he's literally shoveling
I'm
shit.
renting it next week.
Yes. And
Right.
yeah. And so people see our industry and they see these brew pubs popping up and they see people waiting in lines for 4 packs of beer, and to them that means success and that means money. And so I think that it makes it easier for them to reach out and say, can we have this?
Yep.
Because they think that we look so successful. People ask us all the time, and it's like, you don't realize how many people ask us every day, every month.
Well, let's talk about then on like stipends. Like, what are
Yes.
acceptable stipends
That's-
right
yeah,
now?
that's actually a great subject, you're right.
Because like, if we're talking about like that's their perception, if they're hosting an event, they need to know what acceptable stipends are, and also what they should offer breweries that are traveling.
Yes.
Like coming from my end, and granted, I still think this is like on the low end. Like knowing what beer costs, like I have a certain perception of it, but like if I ask a brewery to travel, they get a hotel, they get a gas card, and they get paid for that beer.
Yeah.
And I've always in the past offered about like 100 per half. And that's usually where the standard that I left it, because you're rarely asking for sixtels. If you're asking for sixtels, you're probably not that big of an event.
Yeah.
You probably
Right.
shouldn't base it off of that. What about you? What do you guys think?
I don't know. North Country was one of the first like beer festivals to start offering stipends to people, paying for hotel rooms, and this was over 10 years ago that they were doing that. And now we've had to look at this past year, and we have to raise our stipend for what's being offered to the breweries, because now it's getting more competitive. I'm seeing $200 to be, I've had, we did an event a couple months ago, silent disco thing, and they paid us $250 to pour beer all night. And we really didn't go through that much, where you have these other events that are not even offering you anything.
And that's the thing with how competitive this is for, hey, we want you at this event. Well, this event's also that weekend. It almost comes down to, hey, if I'm not getting any money to come here, but I can go here and
Yeah.
get my
Yeah.
you value my product and my time. And that's something that's important too, is that not only are you providing this product, it's the man hours that go into
Yes.
having someone there to pour. If they're not providing volunteers, you've got to send somebody from your brewery. And I know most small breweries want to be there so their product is represented effectively,
Yeah.
versus just having some guys like, it's IPA with hops in it, here's this beer. You want to be there to represent your brand. That's taking time. That
Yeah.
could be a day off. And if it's someone that's coming from the brewery, they may have to get paid for that. So all these things have to be
Yeah.
considered when it comes out to effective stipends and proper stipends, and also just having people involved.
Like the next level stuff, but like stuff that I saw while planning Brutal is that I purposely was trying to get brands coming into Pittsburgh that might not distribute here, because I felt that was a way to help differentiate us in a way and get more craft beer drinkers. A couple things that I had to look at that learn the hard way was that if you're asking a brand to come in for one event, they're most likely going to try to sell a whole pallet worth of beer to that city. So they need to make sure that they can sell that in that time frame and not let it sit around. And also, so I think that was like the most effective thing, but also like you're selling that brand coming in too. So you should treat that a little bit, I don't know, not better. You don't want to put like a an out of towner over a local, but like you want to make sure that they walked away feeling like you took care of them tenfold. Like, this past year, some of our traveling, we like made sure we got them dinner before the night before so that they all around could walk away feeling like they came into town for a reason and not just for this event, because that won't matter anymore.
Yeah, we're in the hospitality industry. The beer, I feel like the craft beer industry is an extended part of that, and we have to be hospitable. I've been to a lot of events that have not, and it's like you're clearly not a part of our industry. Knowing that you're charging your vendors water for water bottles, that's complete bullshit.
Right.
I'm actually another. I don't want to like keep jumping around too much, but again, it goes back to like another example of how you can treat people. And it just had come up just about this past week, but last year I went to that Honey Beer Summit, and that actually was probably one of the most hospitable of like summits, events, whatever you wanted to call it. And this is the level you can if you get people backing you and you have a purpose. We got flown in, hotel, like a nice hotel paid for, every meal covered. And they're like good, like this was delicious food. And like I walked away being like, I not only got to come in, not stress about traveling, I got to learn, and I got fed really well. And people took me to really cool places that I got to check out new breweries. I got to check out new environments. And like, that's the level you could possibly go. Mm-hmm. But where do you want to stand?
Yeah.
How big is your event? What are you trying to do? Can you do that? And like, will it reflect what people walk away? Like I walked away being like, I want every one of my friends I know in the beer industry to go to this event, and that says something. So that was like, again, on the top tier, not beer fest related, but beer event related, that I'm like, that went up above and beyond.
Going back to like, are there too many beer fests? I think you have to look at like your location. Do we have too many beer fests in Pittsburgh proper? I think we still have room to develop some of those events to the outer laying areas. Yeah. We have a lot of different craft beer people that do not drive into the city for the uniqueness in what your event is. A metal beer fest is genius. A diversity beer festival is, it's just, you have to have that nichiness at this point. If you're just throwing a regular old beer fest with, nobody, you're not giving them incentive to come out. So there has to be a level of creativity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something like Beers of the Berg set a standard for a general beer fest. Like, I'm saying, like, there's people who've already done it.
Yeah.
Not many things right now. I mean, you really have to try hard to create something that's unique and one of a kind, and you have to find ways to stand out. And it might not be that hard to stand out, but you actually have to think about it and not look like, what is everyone else doing? Yeah.
And I think I might have generalized it too much, just because obviously other cities and states that are picking up this podcast may have different experiences with beer festivals altogether. And there may be too many. There may not be enough. But ultimately, I think that what we've uncovered today is some great tips for folks that are looking to amplify the beer scene in their markets and bring cool events to life. I want to thank you both for joining me in the studio to get this right and to actually record something that we can put out for everybody to listen to.
It's definitely a good start, I think.
Thanks for the Bloody Marys.
Yes, thanks to the Bloody Marys. They were so good.
Yeah,
we needed those.
So this was our Sunday brunch podcast here in the studio. Bloody Marys and little tiny bag sausages provided. I'm not kidding. I was going to lay out like a full buffet, but I was like, I don't have time for this morning.
I'm very hungover, so I just needed a Bloody Mary and some sausages.
Well, Meg and Lauren, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Lauren's been on the show before. I actually have another interview that you'll be hearing with Lauren in the next few weeks, coming up here on the Breaking Brews podcast, but I know that we'll be joined by these lovely ladies again here in the future. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Cool. Thank
Cheers,
you,
man.
All right, kids, that is a wrap on session 19 of the Breaking Brews podcast. I'd like to once again thank Meg Evans and Lauren Baker for joining me in the studio to rap with you guys about event planning and putting together beer events. There was a lot covered today. Hope you had your notebooks and your pens going strong, because there is some great information covered. If you are looking to put on a beer festival, some great information was shared here today to help you get a head start. I'm also going to put the links for North Country Brewing and the Harmony Inn in the show notes in case you want to connect with Meg and Lauren. If you have any questions at all, please feel to reach out to me at the show. Hit me at jason@breakingbrews.com or any of the traditional means that have been shared before via social media. You know the drill. So, once again, Megan, Lauren, thank you very much for joining me on the show, and looking forward to having you back in the studio real soon. So, moving forward, session 20 of the Breaking Brews podcast. If you can believe it already, we've hit the 20 episode mark. Next week, I'm going to be rapping with Russ Kraus, who is the co-founder of pabrewreview.com, which is a great website that you can check out now for all of our Pennsylvania beer drinkers. It's a wonderful spot where you can learn a lot of different aspects about different breweries throughout the Pennsylvania region. They received a grant from the PA State Liquor Board as they were giving out grants to businesses that are looking to help promote the craft beer scene and make it better and stimulate the economy, stimulate the growth of it throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So they've done a great job investing that money into their site to make it a more viable platform. You can check that out now, pabrewreview.com. But Russ and I are going to dive into breweries. We're also going to talk about the importance of influencer marketing. What is it? How is it important? How can it help bolster brands? So Russ and I have a lot to talk about, and you're going to be able to sit front row for that conversation next week on session 20 of the Breaking Brews podcast. Until then, jump in the archives, check out the past episodes, drop a rating and review, help the show grow, help me find more listeners and subscribers. If you haven't subscribed already, do so now over at iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, or Stitcher, and stay up to date on everything you need to know about the podcast over at breakingbrews.com/podcast. This has been session 19 of the Breaking Brews podcast. I am your host, Jason Sircone. We'll be back next week with session 20 with Russ Kraus of pabrewreview.com. Until then, this has been the word of the port.